समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
आप समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
As the new year starts, is the horror of the Air India 171 crash being forgotten? And more importantly, will the truth ever be known? As the ailing father of Captain Sumit Sabharwal, the commander of the aircraft, told me, he said, "This is not just about my son, it's about every person who flies and wants to be safe when they fly." The story may have fallen off the headlines in other media organizations, but here at the Mojo Story, we've had committed coverage to every development, every twist and turn of this case. As the next hearing of the Supreme Court approaches, the Federation of Pilots is worried that a certain narrative is being created, a narrative that is preconceived and designed to blame the pilots. This after a preliminary probe panel that has been widely criticized. The Federation of Pilots has sent a legal notice, in fact, to the AAIB for summoning a relative of Captain Sumit Sabharwal. These summons, the Federation of Pilots argues, are ill-founded and only point to the fact that there is an attempt being made even now without concrete evidence to blame the pilots. On this program today, we'll be speaking to a top electrical engineer based out of Australia who says he can, with evidence, demonstrate, even looking at the contradictions of the preliminary probe panel report itself, he can demonstrate that the pilots are not at fault. We will also be joined by one of the key petitioners in the case, who himself runs the Safety Matters Foundation. Let me introduce both our guests today as we look at 5 seconds. You need to look at 5 seconds of the preliminary probe panel. Last time we brought you the final 12 seconds of the ill-fated flight. Today we'll be looking at the first few seconds, and in fact looking at 5 seconds as documented by the probe panel report itself to show you the contradictions and why the truth is something very different. I want to welcome to the program Captain Amit Singh. He is a key petitioner in the Supreme Court in the Air India 171 crash case. He also has done some very important research himself and has continued to do it, and we welcome you back to the program. And I want to welcome from Australia today a top electrical engineer, Jeremy John Thompson. Jeremy also runs his own YouTube channel. You can look that up for very, very detailed videos. But here he's going to try and explain all the expertise that he has, also for a general audience, as to why the information claimed in the probe panel report itself is contradictory and points to a very different set of facts. Thank you very much to both of you. Jeremy, I'd like to start actually with you. And as we talk to you, I want to bring up some slides that we were able to put together looking at the videos on your own YouTube channel. And again, for everybody who's deeply interested in aviation, we urge you to look up the channels that are run by both of these gentlemen, Jeremy and Amit. Jeremy, basically what you do is you look at 5 seconds, 080842 to 080847. And we're going to go through these slides one by one. And what you do very interestingly is that you actually quote directly from the preliminary probe panel report. And you say, if we can just go back to 42, please. If we can go back to 42, I want to just go on this one by one. Let's go through these slides. You begin with how at 080842, the probe panel report itself says that the aircraft achieved maximum recorded airspeed of 118 knots. Then what happens 1 second later? Once again, we're quoting directly from the probe panel report. You point out that the report says the first fuel control switch transitions from run to cutoff. Now, mind you, this is what the probe panel report is quoting. Then, because there's a difference of only 1 second between the two switches allegedly running from run to cutoff, you point out that at 080844, the second fuel control switch transitions from run to cutoff. And then you quote the probe panel to say, it uses approximate language. It says, the rat begins supplying hydraulic power at about, that's what the pro panel says, at 080847. And here's the clincher. And that takes us to the last slide. You point out that technically it is not possible for the rat to supply hydraulic power within 3 to 4 seconds. At minimum, the rat needs at least 6.5 to 7 seconds to supply hydraulic power. This can mean only one of two things. Either that the report got the first timestamp wrong about when the rat is deploying or supplying hydraulic power, or whatever happened 7 seconds before 080847. Now I'm going to let you explain your findings, the contradictions in the report itself. Jeremy, it's over to you.
Okay, thanks, Barkha. Yes, look, it's 6.35 seconds is quoted in all documentation as the time it takes to achieve the maximum pressure for hydraulics to function. Okay, this timestamp on the preliminary report says that at this timestamp 80847, the rat starts supplying hydraulics. Okay, now it doesn't go clear into whether or not that is beginning some hydraulics or whether it is full hydraulics. But what it talks about is that something sensed hydraulics. That means hydraulic pressure required for the aircraft exists. Now, if it takes, let's say, roughly 6 seconds, okay, that puts that event that the rat put down, that puts it just before, in fact, quite a bit before the fuel cutoff switches were apparently touched. Okay, so if we then say, well, how many seconds really was it at 0847? So we'll go back to 46, 1, 2, 3, 4 seconds. Okay, now the rat should only, in theory, deploy if both of these things are off. So therefore, it's the later of the two fuel switch transitions. So that gives you only 3 seconds. This is impossible, but this is not the only piece of evidence that you have to suggest that this was not why the rat deployed. There are others.
Yeah. Let's try and simplify this further for people who are not as accomplished as yourself and Amit, who want to know the truth of the crash, and we want to explain this to them simply. And I would count myself in as one of those. I've reported this story closely, but I am not a technical person. Here is my understanding of what you're saying. You are saying that the report itself claims that at about 080847, the rat starts providing hydraulic power to the engines that have clearly failed, which is why the rat is deployed. However, you argue that if this happened, if 080842 is when the aircraft is recording maximum speed, that's only 5 seconds from that point to when the report is claiming that the rat is providing hydraulic power. And it is not possible for the rat to do this within 3 seconds or 4 seconds of the time the first fuel switch allegedly transitions from run to cutoff. Basically, you're saying this is not scientifically possible. So either the report has got something very wrong in the timestamp is given for when the rat provides hydraulic power, or something has happened well before that the report isn't looking
Correct. Correct. 3 seconds we've got between 44 and 47 seconds. Only 3 seconds. Okay, it would need both. There is further problem with this hypothesis or this suggestion in the preliminary report. The engines do not trigger rat deployment simply when turned off. They do not. There is nothing in the documentation that says that. In fact, the documentation lists very clearly, all documentation lists very clearly how the automatic rat deployment functions. And if we would like to share screen, I will share screen now, if I may. And I will go straight to, just bear with me, I will go straight to the Ram air turbine deployment. So on the screen here, we have, now it's very high, very zoomed out. Now I will get into this. We have every single source.
I'm going to ask our producers to go full screen. Yeah, go ahead now.
Good. Every single source of rat deployment logic that I could find. Okay, and they all suggest the similar main 3 automatic deployment methods. I've summarized it all for you. It's on the screen there. I've summarized it all for you in the bottom right down here. Okay, these are the triggers of rat deployment. Automatic. First, after 10 to 15 seconds of continuous loss of electrical power due to the generators below output power RPM, the rat will then trigger, which means the engines have to have spooled below minimum idle RPM, okay, and then wait another 10 to 15 seconds. Now, Barkha, that puts the rat deployment as a result of fuel cutoff at about the point that we saw the fireball. This is not the cause, so we can eliminate number one. Number two, when all sources of hydraulic power, left, center, and right, are below minimum pressure, 2000 psi is the minimum lowest oil pressure. Hydraulic pressure. The left and right hydraulic systems are both engine driven, okay, and the center is only electrical, okay. The outers are electric and engine driven. There are far too many systems here. They could not have possibly gone below that pressure immediately. It's impossible. Thirdly, the third point, immediately upon loss of both instrument buses. Now, the only way that both instrument buses could be down is if their 28-volt supplies and the backup battery don't work. Keynote and the backup battery. This is the only one that can possibly trigger automatic rat deployment out of all of the rat deployment logic, all of the automatic rat deployment logic. There is, of course, the possibility out there that someone manually deployed the rat as a form of this will trick the investigators. However, if that was what had happened, they would have happily said that in the preliminary report. There would be no reason for them to hide that if that's what he did. They would use that. There is no mention of it. They talked about automatic rat deployment. The other thing would be some other unknown, undocumented hardware fault. Out of everything that we see on this screen, number 3 screams at me and lines up with all of the timeline reported events in the preliminary report, down to the second.
Okay, this is truly fascinating, and basically what you are suggesting, and we will come to that later in our conversation, is that something did go wrong with the batteries, and that is the only sort of scenario that explains what we're looking at. But before that, if we can just go back to the distillation of your arguments and to our main slides, I want to bring in Captain Amit Singh to add to this. Amit, you're a petitioner in the case, and this is really critical. The fact is that what Jeremy has done is that he has picked up details of the AAIB report itself to point out that this timeline, if we all accept that it takes a minimum of 6.5 seconds for the rat to do what the report says it did at 080847, then either the 080847 is wrong and the report has got that wrong, or something has happened to this plane at least 6.5 seconds prior and not at 080842 as is claimed in the report. So I want you to add to this, Captain Amit Singh.
So if we go back to the timeline again, the aircraft lifts off at 080839. That is recorded in the black box, the EAFR.
Yeah.
And 180 knots is the maximum speed recorded. So now the source has not been given. It is just a maximum recorded speed. So if you logically see, if I cut off the engines at 080842 and max speed is 180, with the momentum, the aircraft will go beyond 180. So that is why they've written the recorded speed. It is not what the actual speed the aircraft attained. It is what has been recorded in the black box. And again, we'll come to that. Why is it recorded and not as per EFR? And then the EFR comes back after 10 seconds. So if we look at the simple analogy, if you're driving a car and you switch off the engine at 4.2, the engine stalls. It shuts down, which means the ignition which was happening, the flame which was burning stops. So the fuel control switches control that flame. They do not control the electrics or the rat. Right? So the rat will deploy based on the conditions that Jeremy just put forth. So it is not the fuel control switches which drives the rat. They only control the fuel and the flame. And like a car will continue to roll. So engine stalls, the car will continue to roll. If the a generator is connected, like in the cycles before, the dynamo was connected to the tire. So until the tire or the wheels spin down to a level beyond which the electricity cannot be sustained, the rat will not
Yeah.
deploy. So that will take about 10 to 15 seconds. So after 4.2, it will take about 5.2, 5.4, after which rat will deploy. But here the
So
rat
can,
deployed soon after takeoff.
So actually, we should be accurate. The report doesn't give us a timestamp for when the rat deploys. We don't actually have that timestamp. But if I can just go 2 slides ahead, what we do have is an approximate timestamp. And I want to be careful in my words, Amit, because I need to go to the last slide, please, to 47. What we do have is an approximate timestamp because the report uses the language, and Jeremy also is annoyed that it uses that language, that at about 080847, the rat begins supplying hydraulic power. So one, to be clear, we don't have a timestamp for when the rat is deployed. We have an approximate timestamp for when the rat begins to supply hydraulic power. Now, when you look at this and you work backwards, which is what Jeremy has done, let's go, minimum we have to go 6.5 seconds backwards. Where does that take us to?
So that leads us to somewhere near the airborne time.
Exactly.
So around 39. So what we have seen is that 180 knots is a recorded speed, which is not coming from the black box. It is coming from some other source. Maybe black box, but there was an electrical disturbance, and that is the last recorded good speed. So after that, there is a disturbance, and the black box stopped recording the speed. That is why they said recorded speed. So the speed may have gone to 190 knots or 195, but last good speed which was recorded before everything cascaded was 180 knots. So this is a timestamp to be remembered. And soon after that, the rat deployed. That is given in the preliminary report.
Yeah.
But they have not
So
given the
there's
timestamp.
yeah. So if I may say to you, or if I may ask you, Jeremy, does this point to the report not having done its detailing very well? Because the report
Yes.
should have caught what you did, and you basically caught the fact, as did Amit, that the timeline doesn't add up.
Correct. It reveals that they didn't want to talk about when the rat deployed. And the photograph of the ram air turbine was purposely taken at the end of the runway, well after the rat had deployed. Okay, if I can, yeah, there you go. That's been triangulated, and at that point in time, the aircraft is still transmitting 115 volt powered transponder signals to the ADS-B, okay, which proves that the engines are still generating alternating current at this, even after this picture, which means the engines are still rotating, and the variable frequency starter generators are still generating alternating current. Okay, so the 15-second countdown for engine failure would not have even started at this photo, yet the ram air turbine is out. And that's because it deployed because of the DC side, as I showed before, number 3 in the green. It deployed because of the DC side, not because of the alternating current side.
Okay, we haven't spoken about that, so let's get to the next set of slides. Your argument, and I want to understand that this part of the argument made by Jeremy and Amit is very clear. Basically, any technical person will tell you that the rat needs 6.5 to 7 seconds to supply hydraulic power. From the time of the engine shutting down, the report has either miscalculated or mistold. And Jeremy believes that the report has not wanted to give us the precise time at which the rat has deployed. Now, Jeremy, you have a working hypothesis that I want to understand. You basically talk about the main battery of the plane having failed close to or even before takeoff. And I want to understand this point more precisely. Please go ahead.
Okay, so in order for all of the timeline of events to line up, including rat deployment when it did, okay, we need to work out how the aircraft managed to get electricity back to restore the apparent fuel switch position. Okay, and that is, as we know from the ram air turbine data, 10 seconds. So hydraulics is 6 seconds, electricity is 10 seconds. okay, up to thereabouts. If we go back 10 seconds from roughly when the first switch came back, okay, you will come back to the same timestamp as when I said that the rat would deploy before. Okay, so we have two things indicating when the rat should have deployed. We have the return of electricity and the recorded hydraulics. From that same thing, if we work back, there is a logic in the bus power control units of this aircraft, which says if there's a problem with the battery, monitor for 15 seconds, and I can show you this raw data, monitor this for 15 seconds, and if it continues to be a battery fault, open up the main battery relay to isolate the battery. But it will wait 15 seconds. And that 15 seconds puts us to exactly when, or just a half of a second, okay, well, to the exact second, within the return of electricity for fuel switches to turn back on, the first one. And
So
then
sorry. Can I interject here just
Yes.
to understand this better? If I understand you correctly, you are working backwards from the time that the fuel control switch comes back on or power of some kind is restored back to the engines. And working backwards from there, you believe that something happened right before takeoff or at the point of takeoff. Am I correct?
right after,
Right
at
after.
rotation, which is when the pilots pull back, right after rotation. So
Right.
that is when the gear, when they call out rotate, they rotate, positive rate, gear up. The second that they instructed gear up, the gear did attempt to go up, as we've seen in the video of the truck tilt pointed down. Okay,
Yes.
they're in air mode. So the captain did, or the first officer did, select gear up. And that was the event which led to the end, sealing the fate of this battery short circuit. It went from being a soft short, which had already triggered the 15-second countdown, to becoming a hard short, right behind that hut. Right behind
Right.
that hut.
And taking that to its logical conclusion, what you actually argue, and this is the operative bit, and then Amit, I'll bring you in. You say that if you work on this idea that the battery shorted, I'm saying this simply, so if I use technically incorrect language, please correct me. Then actually the fuel control switches never physically transitioned from run to cut off. They basically lost power because of the shorting.
Yes. Everything on the captain and first officer's instrument bus died due to a systems oversight error, which allows the bus tie contactors to connect the left and the right buses together, the captains and the first officers. That is documented as a fact in both Boeing's manuals and in the electrical system designer of the aircraft. And that takes exactly 1 second. Now, what have we seen had a timeline of 1 second between it? Engine 1 off and engine 2 off. That was the time it took to send the short circuit from the captain's bus across to the first officer's bus.
Okay, I'm going to ask Amit to join this conversation on this. I'm not sure that I've fully understood it. I'm trying here. But one thing that is very important in this is we've all agreed, because of how Jeremy and you have explained it, that if the rat did in fact supply hydraulic power at 080847, then something happened at least a minimum of 6.5 seconds before it, which takes us to right after takeoff or right on rotation. Now, Jeremy believes that there's been a shorting of the main battery, and that has led to, he's not used this phrase, I'm using it, a kind of cascading effect. This is something that you've also been looking at. And basically in this cascading effect, it's not that anyone has turned off the fuel control switches physically. In fact, he argues the fuel control switches never physically move. They simply lose power, and then the power comes back. But by the time the power comes back, it's too late. Please correct me at any point, both of you, if I'm saying this wrong. Amit, it's over to you.
Exactly. Your understanding is correct. I just want to bring about a point about the systems remaining and which systems were lost. So the rear black box was found in a state in which the data could not be recovered. It may have been recovered by now, but at the preliminary stage, they could not get data from the rear black box. Why is it important to get data from the rear black box is because it is directly connected with the electrical circuit, whereas the front one has its own battery that will continue to run despite a total electrical failure. So the moment the rear one stops recording is the point at which there was a total electrical collapse or the supply to the black box stopped. So that is important. That is an indication. If we get the data, that is a clear indication when it happened. Now we don't have the data. So secondly, we look at this 180 knots recorded speed. So recorded speed is basically the front black box is still recording because it has a battery. And now there's a DC problem or a disturbance in the whole system. So that is why it has stopped recording thereafter, because it records only the last good information, which was 180 knots. Next is, like Jeremy said, the ADSB, the flight data, the flight radar 24, which gave out snapshots of the speed and the altitude. It stopped giving data after 080850. Now, Jeremy would support me that ADSB is powered by AC, and AC is being given by the generators so long the engines are turning. So after 50, ADSB dropped, which means the engines had come wound down to a low rotation speed that it could not generate AC power. So that is an indication that till 50 or 51, the engines were still running, not running, the turning. And nowhere in the report have they said that the engines shut down. The shutdown word is not mentioned. It just says at 47, the N2 dropped below subidle. Even though the N2 drops below subidle, but they have a gear system and the generators continue to supply power. So at 50, the flight radar 24 is an indication that AC was still being supplied, which means the RAT could not have deployed. The RAT would be deployed after this stage. Had
So do you
electricity
agree?
had the
Do you agree with the approximate time given for the hydraulic supply, which is 080847? Because it's again approximate. It says about.
Yeah, so that is it started supplying. So not
Right.
the
Fully
rated-
supplying, not fully being able to revive the sort of power. So basically what we're really talking about in layperson's term, Amit and Jeremy, let me come to you, is a shorting of an electrical system. Am I saying it correctly,
Yes.
Jeremy?
You're effectively clamping the voltage potential such that it will not allow current to flow from the DC rectifier system, which is powered by the generators. It won't let current flow because it shorted and did such a high flow of current through the short circuit that the system disables the output of the TRU. It's just too much current. And that is when the DC drops completely and the captain's instrument turns off. The bus tie contactor connects to try and bring it back on. That sends the short circuit through to the right. And now you have both clamped to zero until something can shake off that short circuit. And that's what happened at the 15-second mark from rotation, or from just before rotation, when the short just started and was just bad enough for the battery charger unit to recognize it and start that countdown.
So let me ask you this, Jeremy. The entire finger pointing at the pilots has been based on a summarized alleged conversation that takes place between the two pilots on did you move the fuel control switch? And what you're saying is that you don't believe the fuel control switch is ever physically moved. And indeed, even according to the probe report, the commander says, no, I did not. And and you believe basically that the power, the shorting of the electrical system took away the electrical supply. And by the time it starts coming back, because the RAT deploys, it is possibly too late. The plane is also at very low altitude. It's also flying through very, very densely populated areas. I'm going to ask you what do you make of the fact that the entire finger pointing at the pilots has been based on this singular summarization. We don't have the actual transcript of the cockpit voice recorder, or the singular summarization of the fuel control switches having been turned off by one of the pilots. I mean, entire stories have been written. His father, whom I interviewed, has actually gone to court saying that my son was a professional pilot, and I take great objection to these suicide theories. So I want you to talk a little bit more about that, Jeremy.
Okay. Well, firstly, I don't speak the language,
Yeah.
but I can listen to what is said in the preliminary report and understand that that is a translation. Okay, I believe it is probably a translation. If not, let's take it at face value. Let's say that's exactly what was said. He said, "Why did you cut off?" And he did not ask a person. He just asked, "Why did you cut off?" Okay, now I didn't think I'd be getting into this. He asked, "Why did you cut off?" There are 101 reasons why he would ask that. Firstly, the aircraft just suddenly slowed down and lost engines.
Correct.
Secondly, there's a power conditioning module in every single one of the instruments on the panel, and he would have had time to have seen the gigantic red flashing red ECAS message, fuel cut left, fuel cut right. Okay, you do not ignore that. You did not ignore that. The switch wasn't moved. This was a response, a very sensible response to seeing the fuel cut off and feeling the fuel cut off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The response was the truth. I did not.
Yeah. No, I'll tell you why I raised it. Because the entire narrative of blaming the pilots has been based on this singular, I want to call it a whisper, because it's almost like a whisper about an alleged conversation that takes place in a cockpit from which we do not have the actual recording. Amit, I want you to add to this. If we go with this hypothesis, very, very detailed, argued in great detail by Jeremy, you're looking at a situation of an electrical failure that takes place right on rotation, that basically that shorts the system and impacts the fuel control switches, that makes it look like they were off, but they weren't actually physically ever cut off. Again, please correct me at all stages if I summarize this incorrectly. Captain Amit, it's over to you.
So if I talk about the CVR, the sentences which were spoken, nobody can tell if it is the captain speaking or the first officer speaking. Because if the EAFR or the black box, the CVR is a part of the black box, is being supplied by the RAT, it is only the area mic which is working. So you cannot differentiate between channels, the captain's channel and the first officer's channel. Area mic is like a mic lying in front of you and two people are sitting. Unless you do a voice analysis, you cannot differentiate who said it. So it is, I don't know how people are jumping to the conclusion that the captain said, because it just generalizes and does not, you cannot identify the person who's speaking. And it is also an indication that RAT was deployed when this conversation happened. Because so long the electrics are being supplied, the RAT is not supplying electricity, the individual channels will be recorded. But once the RAT is supplying, only the area mic is being recorded. So that is also a confirmation. Yeah. Now, coming to the fuel control switches, Jeremy would be in a better position. The fuel control switches are physical switches, and the movement of it can only be determined if you analyze the CVR. And in the CVR, you have to hear a click. So a spectral analysis has to be done of the CVR frequency separation.
But we don't even have a transcript. Amit, we don't even have a transcript. This is a very, this is a very stage 2, stage 3 thing you're talking about. We do not even have an actual transcript of this conversation. It has been summarized in a report which is actually full of multiple contradictions.
So that is the reason why the report says one pilot said to another, because they cannot differentiate. And they do not have a timestamp. Had they given the timestamp, we would have come to know whether the RAT was deployed or not. So at critical stages where we could identify the deployment of RAT, they have not given the timestamp.
Yeah.
So that is...
that's a really important point. And I want to ask Jeremy, you said something in the program just now. You said you believe the report did not want to give the exact timestamp of when the RAT deployed. and that photograph, the third photograph that they then add. And by the way, Amit on previous programs has also raised questions about, do we know for sure that this photograph is actually that plane? We don't even know, but let's assume for now that it is. Why do you believe that the report avoids giving the timestamp of when the rat deployed?
Because it places blame where we don't want it to be placed. It's much easier to blame and cost effective to blame someone who is no longer with us. Okay, and this is what this has all come down to. This company and its regulator who certified the aircraft stand to lose a lot. And we have to be very careful here. Okay, they stand to lose a lot. And they are in many, many deals with India. Boeing Defense, many, many production deals. Now, who is set to lose here? It's not just the manufacturer, it is the regulator for recertifying this aircraft after being warned that the batteries had problems in 2013. Okay, they recertified it and put their name on it, specifically on the battery system, which already showed its failure. And what did they do? They put it in a stainless box to stop the smoke, and they failed to look into, well, what is the result of this electrical problem? Fast forward 12 years, and we've had the first event, unfortunately. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We've had the first event. This is absolutely terrible, unforgivable, and it needs to be kept quiet. And I would hate to say it, but I believe that it is a connection between the two, between the authorities there and the authorities in the United States, to make sure that this is not known, because we are talking about a huge problem for a company who is already suffering immense problems with the other aircraft, the 737 MAX. Okay.
So you're saying that this is basically to give Boeing an easy pass?
Yes. And the issue also stems down to, which I can't talk too much about, you need to speak to the lawyer, also comes down to how much money is going to have to be handed out to the families. But I tell you now, once we are finished here, those families will see the most of a product failure lawsuit, not murder-suicide. We can fast forward to that day if we would like. I'm telling you now, these families deserve the truth. The captain and first officer deserve the truth. And we've found it. Undeniably, it is impossible for this rat to have deployed as a result of turning off the engines. Absolutely, categorically, 100% impossible.
That's very, very strong. And I have to say that one of the skepticisms, Captain Amit, that I felt about the report is that there has to be at least a 50% presumption, or it's either pilot error or it's plane error. And the fact that the report was so quick to give the plane a clean chit is, I think, what first raised everybody's suspicions. And as Captain Sumit, the commander's father, said to me, he said, I felt really terrible for him. I don't know him personally, but he was weeping when I met him. He's a 91-year-old man having to fight in the twilight of his life for his son's reputation. And he kept telling me, it's not about my son. It's about all of you who get onto a plane and fly every day. Do you not want the truth? Do you not want to know whether you're safe or not? Amit, I want to bring you in. The Federation of Pilots has sent a legal notice to the investigators. I don't know if you're aware of this, because they wanted to summon one of the relatives of Captain Sumit Sabharwal. There's a concern in the pilot community that there's a narrative being built, and it's being built to the preconceived notion that Jeremy alludes to, that the report doesn't actually specifically talk about when the rat deployed, because it keeps facts in ambiguity. Most people don't understand. People will move on and the pilots will be blamed, and they're not here to defend themselves. So I just want your thoughts. You've also looked at the timeline. I know you've also looked at the last 12 seconds. And I know you've also looked at the persistent problem with the lithium-ion batteries on the 787, which is a highly electrical plane. We've had incidents of the kind, for example, with All Nippon in Osaka, if I remember it correctly, which is the sort of this uncommanded series of developments that happen, thankfully, after the plane has already landed, and so no lives are lost. So Amit, it's over to you before I give Jeremy the last word.
So we are looking at a very, rather it's a technical matter requiring specialists, high-level specialists. And I don't think that AIB has people of the stature of Jeremy who can pinpoint the fault. So they would depend on the OEM, the manufacturers, NTSB for more information, because they have done research since 2013 when the 787s were grounded. And they would have a lot more information. I don't know if NTSB or other OEMs have been sharing enough information with the AIB for them to come to a conclusion if they are determined to bring about transparency and fairness in the system. So let's assume that they want to produce an unbiased report, but it depends on NTSB and the OEMs to give them the final report on the equipment and the cause of the failure. So now, if they do not have information, what is the next best option? We have seen in other accidents, next best option is to go for the pilot. And if you find a threadbare, any information of any mental health issue or any medication, so that is where they would put the anchor. And maybe it is, again, between NTSB or some other agency and the AIB that they're going to share the blame or the equipment and the pilot. So something of that sort is brewing for sure, because in the beginning when the preliminary report came, it is a very cleverly worded report wherein you cannot fault them because they have not quoted the black box at places where they're not sure.
Basically,
And,
it's deliberately
yeah.
obtuse. It's sort of filled with half information, and I think, as Jeremy has shown, by the report itself, there's a contradiction. And I don't think they probably thought nobody would catch it, but the contradiction caught on how many seconds it takes for the rat to supply hydraulic power is a glaring contradiction that even lay people like me can understand, Amit.
So if you add up the time going forward and coming back, both of them do not match. So that is why there's a discrepancy in the timeline. And next is, like you said, the data source. Jeremy also spoke about the landing gear retraction. The landing gear retraction basically sucked out the energy from the battery. That was the last straw. And the last straw caused the whole, the electrical failure, if I may say. If you see the landing gear in the CCTV image, that is pointing up, which means it is still in the ground mode. Next, after the pilot selects the landing gear up, it moves down and then moves in. In the later images of the video, in the second video, you will see the landing gear, the bogie is in the down position.
Let's play that. I think we have that. Yeah.
So even the New York Times has reported this, which means the lever was selected up. And then when you read the report says the flaps, as per the black box EAFR, were in position 5, which is the takeoff position, and the lever was found in position 5. That is correct. Next sentence, it says the landing gear lever was in the down position. So why don't they say, as per EAFR, the landing gear lever was in down position? Right? So they have very clearly or cleverly deleted that part. And the landing gear was selected up. Maybe it was selected down just before the impact or something, but it was surely selected up. In the second video, which was shot from by the that amateur video, that you would see the bogie position is in down, which is a confirmation that the lever was selected up. So all these points which we have raised is a clear indication and gives a justification to the timeline that whatever happened was not because of the fuel control switches. The rat deployed as a consequence of an electrical failure.
Right.
So in the worst case, if we assume that the fuel control switches were cut off at 4.3 or 4.4, the rat would have deployed at 5.4 or 5.5, but it deployed at 4.2, which means something happened well before. So there's no
I
point.
mean, we don't know when the rat deployed. I have to say that again and again. We actually don't know when the rat deployed. It's deductive, but there's no timestamp in the report. Basically, you're working it backwards from the 4.7. If we can just end with those slides again. Amit, you're working it backwards from the fact that the report says that the hydraulic supply comes in at 4.7. And therefore, you're assuming the rat deployed at 4.2. But even that,
We are working
even at
forward
4.
also. If you
Why?
work forward, if you assume the engines were shut off at 4.3 and 4.4, the rat, as per documentation, would have deployed after 5.4, 5.5.
Agreed.
Right?
I'm just saying we don't know when the rat deployed. Like we simply don't have that timestamp from the report. Yes.
With a reasonable degree of
logical deduction based on available information. Yes. So Jeremy, I want to give you the last word. Here's what's frightening. This isn't only a story about India. The 787, there are 1,200 of them. You know, they fly all over the world. Multiple countries use them. And I would imagine that everybody in the world should be concerned about what really caused this crash to happen. I think you've shown quite effectively that you believe that the report has contradictions that it doesn't account for, that maybe you didn't think would get noticed. And you do believe that there's a high chance that this is not incompetence, but kind of a deliberate obfuscation to keep things vague. Where does this conversation go from here? What would you, for example, be expecting the NTSB to be doing at this point?
Okay, let me just start by saying that I did not just start making YouTube videos. I went to the appropriate authorities on day one. Okay, and I did get a case number and a respondent from members of the appropriate authorities. Okay, once I mentioned what happened, all communication stopped. There was no more replies. They worked out that there's a guy out there who knows what's going on. Okay, and this was within approximately 7 days of the accident, Barkha.
So who did you write to, if I may ask?
Everyone.
Including the Indian Investigative Probe Panel?
Yes, the AAIB of India, the DGCA, each of the individual members that are the heads of the DGCA, the Federal Aviation Administration of America, the NTSB, Boeing themselves, every CEO that has an airline that flies this aircraft, everyone, the ICAO. And I told them all what happened, and I got no response other than the FAA asking me for more information. I gave them the information, and then they went cold. Straight away, cold. Okay, so everybody knows, every single one of these people out there know who I am and have seen it and probably don't know enough about it because it's being hidden so well. Okay, so that's that. My intention from the moment that I got involved was to stop any further loss of life. Yeah, that's all, because it's going to happen again. This is a system oversight failure in this aircraft, which they are known, which is not a surprise for this company. Let's admit, it's a system failure, which is, I hate the term, a ticking time bomb, and it's going to happen again if they are not repaired. The repair has been started in 2024 when India's own Cyient DLM was contracted to make a new design and manufacture a new battery diode module. They were aware of the problem and were trying to fix it as quick as possible before it happened, but time caught up, and unfortunately, the passengers on board AR171 had to go along for the ride. I'm sorry, this is unforgivable, and we need the authorities to step in as soon as possible, ground this aircraft, prove that the aircraft is safe. Everybody, every authority needs to get in and prove this aircraft is safe. Ground it now until you prove me wrong. Okay, but it is impossible for this to have been caused by the fuel switches turning off. Absolutely impossible.
Right. That is a very, very categorical assertion there, using evidence, facts, and contradictions within the AAIB's preliminary probe report. We have a Supreme Court hearing coming sort of soon, I think in the next couple of weeks, Jeremy, and we very much hope that if the NTSB, the regulators, the AAIB won't pay attention, the courts will force them to. And I think what Jeremy is saying is that this is about our safety. This can happen again unless it's addressed. Ground the aircraft, prove that this is not that this is not a risk to fly. And he has shown with evidence, as has Amit, that the timeline as presented in the report simply doesn't add up to run with the theory of a pilot having turned off the fuel control switch. We leave it there. Again, both Captain Amit Singh and Jeremy Thompson have done a lot of detailed work on this. They both have their own YouTube channels. Their videos are in much greater detail with a lot of technical richness that I urge all of you to look up. We thank both of them for their time and their bluntness and their plain speak. Jeremy, Amit, thank you very much. And to our audience, thank you, and see you all again very soon. Take care. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.